Good morning, Rob.
Hey, buddy.
How are you?
Let's dive in. Let's talk about it.
Yeah,
Let's talk
let's
about
let's
2024
dive
and
in.
what's ahead for 2025.
Yeah, so this is now our second annual sort of look forward, look back conversation for the year. It gives us an opportunity to talk about what our goals were in the previous year, what the activities we did, how it went, and what we learned, and essentially how are we taking those lessons and learnings and moving them forward to the next year. So let's just start by kind of recapping our original mission and vision to sort of set the context for the conversation we're going to have today.
Yeah, the broader backdrop. I've actually had a lot of people reach out to me and say they really appreciated our conversations. They've listened to these things and it's given them a lot of context for what we're actually up to, which is cool to hear. These aren't just sort of administrative updates. They actually like tuning in and hearing what's kind of behind the scenes and the deeper why. So again, just to remind everybody the broader backdrop, we're part of a burgeoning intellectual movement that is a part of a set of integral philosophies that emerged over the last 50 years and are still on the fringes of the conventional or mainstream knowledge ecosystem. And they intersect against a world that increasingly looks like it desperately needs it. And yet, by definition, when you're on the fringe of something, it hasn't yet been metabolized into the core of the knowledge economy, right? And so that is always a problem. I mean, there's always a gap between what's coming in from the periphery and what's at the core. And in a lot of ways, if we look through all of history, we see that knowledge systems are arising in response to problems, and there's always a lag between the rise of the problem and the way in which the knowledge then gets generated to help solve the problem. And sometimes it takes decades, often it takes centuries, actually, for that to then ameliorate what some of those things were in response to. So this is not unusual. And what we noticed was that the movement more broadly had moved through a stage one sort of unity or identity with its founders up until the late 90s, until about 2010. We then pointed out that it went through a very significant stage of differentiation, stage two differentiation, and massive fragmentation of views and agendas and all kinds of things. Again, very natural and normal. And what we did is we said, well, we think it's time, given the life conditions, given the problems we're seeing, given the way in which the juice seemed to have been sort of squeezed out of that stage two differentiation, why don't we bring a stage three online in a conscious way? Why don't we try to reintegrate the space and bring more coherence and directed social action to the application of these big pictures in real world settings, so that we can now run up against new limits of what we know. We can run up against new problematics and have to adapt from an organizational point of view, have to adapt as a community in order to advance our own work, but also be of greater service to the world. So for the last couple of years, that's really what we've been on about. And so our the headline social impact is just bringing social action, applying big pictures in a social action-oriented way to any context in the world. But of course, underneath that headline, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of complexity.
Yeah, we started out in the very beginning as a learning organization and with a basic series of hypotheses about what the role of big pictures were in the world and what our role might be in helping to advance those, to address these big complex issues that we face today. So why don't we just briefly kind of revisit those four hypotheses that we touched on last year to sort of see what we've learned in regards to those thus far?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even when we started, we knew that there were some things that were just fundamentally hypothetical about what we're doing. And we needed to be in a long-term inquiry as to whether those things are accurate. So one is, do big pictures work the way we think they do? That's a very still a very robust and important question. We, as I've said many times, like in our own lives, we see that they work really well in some really fascinating ways to index reality and to index other kinds of knowledge and other kinds of apprehensions in different domains, in subjective and phenomenological domains, in empirical and objective and behavioral domains, in social systems, and in culture and values and kind of group interior meaning making. So roughly the 4 quadrants. But I mean, we kind of see that they're really powerful in that regard. And we see our friends and partners sort of making impacts in the world with these things in certain instances. But can we do it in a much more systematic way and directed way in different kinds of contexts? And so that's something we really wanted to put to the test. And we don't take it for granted that that's going to be a slam dunk. The nature of integrative metatheories is they are organizing at the kind of transdisciplinary level. So that means that they're organizing interdisciplinary and disciplinary knowledge. So automatically you start to get into some interesting both methodological and philosophical territory when you start to treat transdisciplinary frameworks inside of a discipline or inside of a context as, for example, a new theory of economics or something, right? And so, or you even try to reduce it to a tool set down in a very particular applied problem inside of, for example, your field philanthropy or whatever. So we think there's ways that you can do that, and we do see applications of that, but we also think that there's learning to be done about what that translation looks like, because these are fundamentally different levels of epistemological emergence in a way. These are different levels of knowledge emergence. And some of our colleagues here at the Institute are working at the next level up even from that, arc theory, where then arc theory takes the various integrative metatheories and starts to ask questions like, well, what unifies those? What are the really primitives of all of the epistemological systems at the highest level of abstraction? So it really gets into fascinating material. But in any case, that hypothesis was really like, well, do big pictures work the way we think they do? The second is around leadership. Nothing happens without leadership. All the great ideas in the world have to get picked up by a human being until the AGI comes along, right? They have to get picked up still by a human being and brought into motion. They got to get organized. They got to get, the emotional energy has to be brought forward by an actual leader who puts their heart and soul into it. And we know we have some good leaders in the space, but do we have enough with the right combination of skills and what have you? And so that's going to be an ongoing thing. Are we willing to third hypothesis, are we willing to coordinate activity? Are we willing to coordinate efforts? So one of the things you see through all of history of knowledge movements is, like anything, right? You get more than 3 humans in the room, you get politics. Well, what you get is you get coalitional effects, as you would expect. And the reason is pretty rational. Humans will take a competitive position if they think that it's the best place to differentiate themselves and to serve their own agenda. They will get behind, and rather than take a competitive position, they'll take kind of a congruent and supportive position if they think that's the best thing for their agenda. Again, this is really typical and, in fact, laid out well by holonic dynamics. We know this about holonic dynamics, and so no surprise in social holons this is the case. Now, if you are a movement in the 21st century that has an integrative metatheoretical view, or you claim to, you better be able to take a self-reflexive view of that very thing and then be able to bring vocabulary and social affordances to open the space so that you get a new freedom of action and a new kind of, hopefully, what we might call sort of post-rivalrous or post-competitive coalitions. So that's going to be something we very much are putting to the test when we preview to 2025. We're going to put that to the test in a big way. If we can, and that works, then I think there's some really interesting fruit that could be born from it, from that kind of collaboration. But we'll see. And then finally, tools. What we see in every emergence of a new way of thinking is they are accompanied by new toolkits. Tools are an embodied form of knowledge. Well, not embodied, but a material form of knowledge. A tool implies both a material form of knowledge and a social practice that goes along with it. So we see new tools co-arise dialectically with both new forms of knowledge and the social practice that accompanies it, and then it becomes an iterative, blossoming of the toolkits themselves. So we should expect that we're going to need new tools, and the question is, can we generate those, and do we have the tools to do the kind of work that we're doing?
Yeah, so I invite our audience to sort of keep those 4 hypotheses in mind, because you'll see them reflected in our strategic approach, and the strategic approach we took this year, and the one we're hoping to take in 2025, as well as a lot of the lessons we've learned tied directly back to those four questions that we're trying to remember to constantly ask ourselves and to test. So thanks, Rob. That was a great synopsis of those. So why don't we talk a little bit, let's begin our work exploring sort of what happened in 2024. So what were some of the key activities and initiatives that we undertook in 2024 to pursue that larger mission that you just detailed?
Yeah, and some of these fit in each one of those. So we continue to build Context AI. Context AI was this experiment in an integrative epistemology. So can we develop a toolkit at the intersection of AI and these big picture frameworks that would allow for more rapid sense making and kind of soundboarding of an idea space and mapping and framing that space or a given context for supporting any kind of initiative, any kind of social action initiative. So we spent a lot of time on that this year, and we felt it was good enough to now release it into the entire Integral Life community, which is kind of a nice milestone. We're still evolving and developing it in a more leading edge way inside the Institute. We ran an RFP process, as you were one of the key leaders of that whole process. We basically opened up the platform that is the Institute to the community and said, hey, let's now, in the mode of, we'll often talk about the mode of being in a think tank and then a mode of a network. And they're kind of two different modes. And this year was very much a network mode. We were like, okay, let's open the network. Let us solicit ideas for proposals. And I think the response was great. We had 53 proposals from all over the world in many different domains, and some with some recurrent themes. And we were able to basically pick roughly 5, 6, 7 that we are working with. Some we're incubating, and several that we are funding to help bring into being. I don't know if you want to get into those specifically.
Yeah, I think
yet.
It's worth highlighting which ones we're backing and supporting. So we essentially funded 4 initiatives this last year. We funded the Encyclopedia of Big Pictures initiative, which is a collaboration with Archdisciplinary Research Center. And that has been really fruitful. We're excited to see what we should definitely see in 2025. The first fruits from that effort. It's going to be an ongoing thing because it will certainly, it's as an encyclopedia, it will expand as we're able to get more contributors to it. But that's been a really powerful initiative. We've got the Metacrisis Mapping Initiative through Nick Hedlund's Eudaimonia Institute, and we're supporting his work trying to get a big picture view of the metacrisis. The meta view of the metacrisis is essentially what that initiative is about. And to get our arms around all the different factors that are contributing to what we consider the metacrisis, as well as the different organizations and leaders and different sort of thought communities that are focusing on different aspects of the metacrisis, and how we're hoping that as that initiative advances, it will give us a better tool for sort of strategic coordination on addressing those issues and figuring out where we can have the most leverage points as a larger big picture movement. We've got the Salt for Climate initiative, which is supporting the work that Gail and Lisa are doing, which is really about, affecting development and epistemic integration capabilities of the leaders in the climate work that's happening. So it's focusing on the leaders in the space and their ability to really work across ideology, to work across sense-making frameworks, and give them better tools to be able to help to negotiate all the different things that leaders in that space might need to be aware of in order to be effective in their work, more effective in their work. And then finally, we've got the Cultural Complexity Index, which is a research project being led by Brendan Graham Dempsey with other collaborators to essentially to track the complexification of thought and cognition and culture across time, using meaning-making frameworks and religious frameworks, matters of ultimate concern, as the sort of benchmark for how human understanding and relationship to matters of ultimate concern are evolving over time, in the hopes that might shift some of the Overton window in academia regarding, ideas of cultural evolution and cognitive evolution. So those are the 4 that we've funded specifically, and then we're helping to incubate 2 or 3 other initiatives, one of which is mine, which is the Integral Social Sector Initiative, and that is launching right now in a sort of sub-project called the Evolution of Philanthropy, where I'm tracking how philanthropy has evolved over the last, 25 years and where we think it might be going towards an integrative approach to philanthropy. And then we've got a civic education initiative being led by John Minkler that's doing some incredible work helping develop a more holistic sort of civic development protocol and process through working with young people across California and a bunch of different schools that he and his organization are leading. And then we have a integral theology initiative that we're also incubating, which is helping to build out kind of a next generation framework for religious practice and religious study and religious, pulling together communities around new integrative approaches to spirituality. So that's the kind of full range of what we're actively supporting, although there's a bunch of other initiatives that we are in consultation with people on and trying to support in a smaller way. That's kind of what our menu is for the year. And it's been in my...
Those are the ones that came in via the RFP, or that we kind of stimulated in a way that was more directly, we initiated them, and then we found the right partners or the right leaders to do them with. Yeah.
So again, I just want to echo your thoughts that it was fantastic to see the interest and the energy that is latent in this community, and that people are interested in working together and are interested in applying these big pictures in really rigorous and powerful ways. So it's been rewarding in that sense. And we'll have more of an opportunity to kind of talk about our lessons learned, but I want to just give a quick recap of the actual initiatives that we've been working with.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that's worth pointing out is what some of the thematic dimensions are there as to what our work looks like it is slotting into. And it's really, in a broader sense, you could say it's all kind of in the broad category of transformative education, which should be no surprise. The nature of an intellectual movement, the nature of an integrative philosophy, almost by definition is a sense-making, meaning-making sort of contribution to the world. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that a lot of what we do is in the realm of education, in the realm of sense-making, that kind of thing. But that transformative education really breaks into, I think, 3 sub-domains that I was just writing down as we were cataloging those. The first is an embodied praxis. And this is where I'd point to like Salt for Climate. They're actually helping with an embodied praxis. John Minkler's effort with the high school students is also a form of embodied praxis. Like, here's what you do, and you're going to be developed along a certain way to do that. So I think this embodied praxis is going to continue to be a theme for us. The second is broader sense-making. So the work Nick's doing with the Metacrisis Initiative, the work we're doing with Context AI, and various other initiatives, like the Big Picture Encyclopedia, right? This is broader sense-making. It's supporting areas of gaps in how to sense make in a broader and deeper way. And then finally, big picture validation. And this is really what Brendan's doing with the Cultural Complexity Index, is the sense that how can we close that gap between the periphery and the core of the knowledge domain so the big pictures are taken more seriously? They are able to act as pathways. The validation is able to act as pathways for people to increasingly move into more integrative modes of research and scholarship. And so I think we're going to continue to see these 3 as sort of staples or legs of the stool for us going forward.
Yeah, and I just want to take this opportunity also to just kind of thank those who were able to apply for the RFP process and weren't funded. I want to reiterate something I think you said last year, which was that none of these things are taken off the table. We are capturing all kinds of information, and we're capturing leaders in different spaces. We're capturing a lot of the work they want to do. We'll talk about a little bit later, we're building a database of people who are interested in contributing in some way or another that's reached about 400 people. So part of this is just sort of scaling strategically our efforts and figure out when to light up different aspects of this larger movement and work that we're trying to do. And there will be other opportunities for folks to get involved. And we will, as we build capacity as an organization and as we hopefully grow our funding as an organization, something we'll also talk a little bit more about, we'll be able to enact some of these pieces. So just because you didn't hear from us or we didn't fund or reach out to you about your initiative now does not mean that there might not be an opportunity in the future to really get some traction on that and for us to be able to support everyone's work in some way. We're trying to scale our efforts strategically since we do have such limited resources, and a small dedicated team that we're running the entire organization on. So I really do hope that there are more ways for people to get involved going forward. And we can talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, I have reached out to people who had applied but hadn't been awarded anything. But I've reached out to two in the last month because they are of interest. The timing has evolved such that where our attention is able to focus on those. And so we're constantly in the process of doing the work of the sort of social entrepreneurship work that we are here to do. But sometimes timing, I mean, as in everything in life, right? Timing matters. And so sometimes it takes us a bit to get around to a certain thing. I've also been, just this morning, I was in our recruiting database looking for a couple of different folks who I think we need. We need graphic design help, and we just need things that we always reach back to that. Going back to the 2024 accomplishments, we also launched the Legacy Circle, and this was a really rewarding exercise. I don't really mean financially, just in the sense that we had a really great response from donors who came in and said, yes, we want to support you. We're really excited. It was really rewarding because it was neat to bring together a group of people. We started small. We're still less than 10 people on the Legacy Circle, but these are wonderful people, very big-hearted, big-minded people who want to make a contribution. And the thing that's been so special for me is to hear how this work and the things that we're doing really light them up. And they're like, man, I've waited my whole career, my whole life to be a part of something like this. And this is finally putting rubber to the road on something that we've wanted, and I'm all in. And that is such a great thing for the team to hear, because it really is motivating. And we know we are really building something that is a symbiotic ecosystem from a lot of different sort of stakeholders who have a lot of different kinds of contributions to make. So it's really cool to have been a part of that this year.
Yeah, and it points to some degree to the, one of the hypotheses of my work, studying the evolution of philanthropy, is that we would anticipate that increasingly we are going to see philanthropists and hopefully philanthropic institutions that start to warm up to this idea that if you want to make systemic change, which is kind of the, call to action of the entire philanthropic world these days, if you want to make systemic change, you need to have frameworks that help you understand how systems evolve, how people evolve, the multidimensional nature of the challenges we face. And so I would anticipate that we are going to start to see more and more of this kind of philanthropy. And it's really, as you say, just rewarding and heartening to come in contact with individuals who are already thinking in that way and are really fired up about the approach that that we're taking, but largely, more importantly, the approach the entire movement is taking to address these problems in a more holistic way. So yeah, that's been a real highlight for the year for sure.
And I want to give some acknowledgement to your work too, because I think your mapping of the social sector, and in particular looking at philanthropy and the evolution of philanthropy, which I know, 2025, you're going to have a lot more to say about that. We'll open the kimono a lot more about what that looks like. But I really do think that is a critical linchpin of the overall social system that is the world today in terms of how it makes impact. I mean, there's $3.5 trillion of philanthropy, and if all of it is focused on concrete physiocentric problems or just, sociocentric problems, one level up, Like, these are important problems, and maybe 98% of the philanthropy should go there, and probably should. But if we don't have anything that is coming at the leading edge, at the emergent big picture edge, to help to create a sort of epistemic reconfiguration of how the world views and the sense making that goes on around all the rest of that money, all the rest of our social milieu, then we're going to be wasting money. We're going to not get the effects that we get. And so us focusing on that leading edge and putting that into place, and the work you're doing to make that object, to say, here's where this is going and here's why it's so important that philanthropy have its own way of seeing itself via these big pictures is really cool. And I'm looking forward to your continue to expose that to the community.
Yeah, there will be, you'll hear a lot more about that as I start to publish and socialize some of the research that I've been doing. So I'm excited to share that with the world too. So anything in terms of our activities from 2024 that you would like to highlight that we missed?
No, I think that's pretty good summary of the year. I mean, it was overall, I'd say it's just a great year. It was a really, really good year. We made a huge amount of progress. We learned a lot, even in the things that you would say didn't work to our favor. As I've said all along, and this is the entrepreneur in me, like, there's no failure, there's just learning. So it's great. Reality tells us stuff, we listen and adapt. Oh, I mean, I guess I'll jump into that, because I think this is probably
let's talk about what we actually take away and learn.
2024. Yeah. I mean, and I'll start with what was a disappointment, but frankly, not a huge one, because I didn't have a massive expectation around it. I wasn't totally surprised, but it was really important just to tap into from the point of view of learning, which is we took a couple of our initiatives and we put out a very well-crafted response to the Templeton Foundation. And these were projects that were right in line with the kind of mission they have. We know that they are big picture thinkers. These had very deep benches of scholars and scholarship from top organizations from around the world. These are our initiatives that we're putting forward. So it ticked every box. And when both of those were not responded to as something that they would be interested in, as I said, I was not surprised, but I was informed. And it was like, okay, if we have our strongest foot forward with our strongest, most pressing scholarship in what should be one of the most best organizations to catch that and to listen it, and that was not taken up, I don't fault them. Like, every organization, every foundation has their own decision-making process. So don't hear this at all as like a criticism of them. It's truly not. It's just me playing the math and saying, well, okay, there's not 1,000 other Templetons that we can go to. Given the nature of our work, we have a math problem, which is to say, we can't play the law of large numbers. I mean, coming out of my world, the entrepreneurial world, where you're funding, let's say, a startup, you can play the law of large numbers. You can go pitch 100, private equity firms or venture capital firms or angel investors. You will get one, right? It's just a numbers game. You'll get one. The reason that works is because the universe of funders is big enough. When I saw this piece of feedback come back, I said, we're in a very different world now, because what it means is we can't play the law of large numbers. We have to play a different game. We have to be more strategic. We're not going to be able to rely on even the people we think could be allies. Now, I'm not writing them off forever, obviously. I mean, we'll continue to try to do that. But what it means is that we would be foolish to count on it. And so that was a strategic shift. And one of the big learnings of 2024 was like, okay, we tried that, but that hypothesis didn't play out. And so, like I said, it's, we're not giving up, but we are not going to rely on it going forward as kind of our sustainability strategy for some of our initiatives. We're going to have to do some other thing.
Yeah. And in some ways, I'm sorry to keep highlighting the initiative I'm leading, but in some ways, that's part of what we're trying to do with this Evolution of Philanthropy initiative, is to create the framework for understanding, for helping philanthropic institutions themselves to understand what they're being called to do in this, as the field itself evolves, and what's
That's right.
possible if you take a larger picture.
Because maps are liberating. I mean, maps are not just these playthings. Maps are actually liberating. in the sense that they open up new possibilities because they tell us things that are blind spots for us, and they begin to solve problems that we feel, but we maybe couldn't articulate because we didn't have the vocabulary or the distinctions to make it object. So that's what maps do. That's why maps actually help you grow up. It helps to differentiate your mind in powerful ways. So what you're doing by generating a map of future territory is you're probably going to, not for 100% of the organizations, maybe only 5%, but you're going to give them a way to go, this begins to solve problems I feel, but I didn't have language for. And as that happens, that's a transformational fulcrum. So the very work you're doing acts as a transformational propulsion for those kinds of organizations. Now, obviously, that's a long-term game we'll be playing to try to support that sort of move, but it is the kind of work we have to do.
So what other learnings would you want to highlight from this last year?
I think that we found, again, no surprise, the community that we have been working with sometimes is fantastic on the scholarship, but the social entrepreneurial skills, understandably, it's not an entrepreneurial community. Are generally speaking, what we've convened across 20 years and tens of thousands of people, there are entrepreneurs, but it's not, I'd say that's not like strongly represented. And so there is a question about how do we help support the social entrepreneurial skills that people might need to really take leadership of an initiative as a thing in the world. Like, okay, how do I find my stakeholders? How do I think about my customers? How do I think about my first product, first delivery? What's their pain points? How do I get to them? How do I pitch? Like all of these things that are that most entrepreneurs are fairly comfortable with. We have an interesting issue where we're trying to blend like the world of scholarship on the one hand with the world of social entrepreneurship. And then on top of that, the world of big pictures. And so there's this sort of very small Venn diagram, and we're gonna have to think about, and we are thinking about how do we support that? Do we do it by creating some sort of incubation program, some sort of accelerator? Do we have some of our friends create that system as an outside, third party kind of program? I mean, there's obviously different choices there, but that's something that we learned. We learned that context mapping is powerful. It is useful. It's very educational, and it's also very partial. Like there's a way in which it's the first beat of the story. Like it helps you to organize your thinking. It helps you to kind of get your thoughts on paper. It helps as an educational tool to communicate messages. We will continue to do that with our community and use these kinds of maps to show people what we're thinking and the kind of distinctions we're making. They're really cool that way. But they're also limited. Like they're not going to go execute the initiative for you. And so naturally there was a way in which, okay, we've done the work with context. It'll continue, but now it's time to shift our attention a bit.
Yeah, and I want to actually drop back to the previous point you made about leadership and point out a couple of things that I feel like I've observed over this last year and have been thinking quite a bit about. There's there's a way in which being at the leading edge of philosophy, for example, right, which we could hopefully with some humility suggest that we feel like we are, inevitably leads to certain sort of individualized efforts. And since a lot of the work that this space has done, sort of applying big pictures to different domains, has either happened in individual, sort of business pursuits that people have made, whether that's coaching or consulting in some way. There's been some traction in the space around that some applied big picture thinkers have been doing. And then there's a lot of scholarship that has been done, which is essentially, you might have one or two or even three people collaborate on a scholarship project, but there's a lot of these efforts are going towards sort of individual artifacts or individual work. And it really is this kind of coordination hypothesis question is one that I'm thinking a lot about. And I do have to say that I am, there's been challenges in trying to get this sort of coordinated social action together and the task cohesion together for the space. But I'm also buoyed by the willingness of the larger movement of which we are a part to start to cross over some of those boundaries and to collaborate in a more significant way and to, make our own philosophical lineages like object to a new subject that's willing to sort of collaborate across different ways of thinking about a big picture or using them. So that's been a really powerful takeaway for me this year, is that it's not just us, in the integral community and those of us who are sort of working from that side, who are ready to say, let's open this up. Let's begin to see what happens when we start to work in real dialogue and collaboration with each other.
Yeah, I would echo that. There is a real generosity of spirit that we have found with people we have been really privileged to bring into the Institute's umbrella, that are working across different intellectual lineages from the level of integrative or unification metatheory. And it's really beautiful. And we especially feel it when we start using each other's language. I think there's a generosity there where it's like, people will start to inhabit and use some of the integral language, or, somebody will shift and use the critical realist language, or they'll shift and use the metamodernist language, or complex thought, or university theory of knowledge. Like there's a shifting and a crossing over where there's not lineage boundaries, because all of these things have some important contributions to make. And in any given context or in any discussion, you're going to find that the sort of the knowledge system you go to, or the integrative metatheory that you choose, is going to be better fit for purpose with a lens that it brings than maybe some of the others. And so that's something that I think also the community will really enjoy over time. By following our work, they're going to get exposed, and they're going to open their own minds to a much bigger universe of what is really going on in the 21st century as it relates to these unification knowledge systems. And it's really profound. So I'm looking forward to having people accompany us on that journey.
Me too. So what other key takeaways are we noticing from this last year?
A lot of what we've talked about here has been what I might call kind of right-hand stuff. We've talked about tools, we've talked about systems, we've talked about organizational models and impact models and all of that. We knew at the outset, but we just hadn't really kind of made it a focus that at some point there's going to need to be storytelling. Like a transformational thesis, a transformational fulcra exists in being able to tell big picture stories in a big, beautiful, heart capturing, soul animating way, period. And indeed, it may in fact be the most powerful transformational lever that has ever existed, is just really great storytelling. Humans respond to it for very good reasons. So we're aware of that. And I do believe that as we move forward, we're going to feather in some of that storytelling as a more focused and conscious thing that we want to help generate.
Yeah. So let's use that as an opportunity to kind of, that's a great segue to talk about what's upcoming for 2025, what our plans and hopes and goals are. And let's talk a little bit about sort of like how you see the context having shifted that we're operating in. And in this sense, I mean the broader, just societal level context in regards to how we have decided we want to move forward strategically in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it comes as any surprise to anybody around the world, not just the American voter, but everybody around the world, that something seems to be coming to an end. Something seems to be on its last gasps, and there's a bit of an exhaustion that's occurring because there's system breakdown in a lot of different ways. We obviously see it in our political systems, but not just there. We see it in health outcomes. We see it in the sense making and the meaning fragmentation. We see it in the epidemiological data. We see it in the meaning crisis, as John Vervaeke says. We see it obviously with the meta crisis and what have you there. And there is a way in which it feels just really right for big pictures to reemerge as a way to credibly, not in kind of a pre-trans moving back to a pre-modern or pre-credible mythos, but in a post-rational mythology, something that would really animate a 21st century worldview of meaning and a bigger picture of wholeness, and something that restores some of the transcendental spirit that has always sustained humankind, but for 500 years has been given very short shrift by the multiple punch between, secular humanism on the one hand, positivism, the death of grand narratives under postmodernism. Like there's all kinds of ways that for 500 years that has really been beaten up. And as we've said, Ken has pointed out, the Romantics didn't have a praxis. They might have had the transcendental spirit, but without a praxis. And so there is a way in which we feel big pictures are more important than ever. We can see it on the front page of the newspaper every day. And we just really think that's an important thing to bring forward, particularly in this political moment. Like that's also very acute amongst the partisanship and what have you. So inside of Fracture, I've called it the Great Release. What's happening as we move into the transformation age. I've been saying that for 10 years, but what is happening there is also a moment of great opportunity. Like there's huge opportunity to do the kind of work we're doing. I mean, at the end of the day, as we've talked about internally, like nobody really cares about big pictures in a 2009 moment with Obama in office. And it feels like progressivism is winning, and, it's all, as they say, changey hopey or whatever they say, right? And there is a way in which that it does take certain kinds of geopolitical and economic and socio-cultural life conditions to just get destabilizing enough where people pick their head up and go, okay, we need to do things differently. And so new opportunities for listening and reception are now available. So that's also pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I think it's been interesting to see our own reaction to some of the, tribulation and discord and conflict that our last political year has sort of brought to the surface. It's been interesting to watch my own reaction to how we in this community are sort of responding to that moment in ways that are providing hope, not just for hopefully those in the movement, but for myself. It's been really powerful to be a part of a community that is working to do something about these big issues and the fracture and the schism in our societies, to actually be in a position to be able to do something about it that might lead us towards a more constructive outcome coming out of this. So it's going to be an interesting year, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it'll be an interesting decade.
Yeah, exactly. Not just a year. So what are some of our other plans, and how do you conceptualize sort of the focus of the Institute going into 2025?
Yeah. So if we think about the model between the network and the think tank, I do think that there's a move back to focusing on the think tank sort of part of our duality. Some of the initiatives that we're going to be doing are going to be much more strategic and centrally located inside of the Institute with a small team of leaders that is focusing on, in a way, kind of the sociological underlaboring of the movement itself, really grounding ourselves in the sensibility, the historic sensibility of how these things tend to succeed or not. What are the conditions that help to do so? How can we kind of have right expectation, but also right action relative to that understanding? That's all work that has, to my knowledge, not been done. And there's pieces of it in little places, but we really want to do that, because if we're going to make, and we are making, but if we're going to make a truly generational call that's 20 and 30 years long or longer, we need to have that foundation under us that says, here is the nature of the project. Here's why we have thought through some of what we're doing in a meaningful way. Here's the ethical guideposts to what we're attempting to do. And that becomes a foundation that we can sort of build on. We will still support some of the network initiatives. In fact, we have several that are going to be potentially launched or announced probably the next 6 months anyway. But I think it's going to be some more of that sort of foundational work in the sociology of big pictures.
Yeah, I sort of see the focus of the work that you're describing as kind of our, larger meta theory of change for these big picture approaches and a larger, more integrative worldview coming more to the surface. So it's exciting to be able to sort of chart that and to then use that to guide our own strategy about where the leverage points are that we can lean on to hopefully, over, as you say, the next decade or decades, to slowly actually start to shift the culture towards these more integrative big picture approaches and thinking. And it is,
this is not a head in the clouds theorizing. I am doing conversations now every week with a Zoomer who is talking to me, who's coming into our community, the broader kind of integral life community or the Institute, and talking to me directly for a half hour to an hour about what they're going through and how they're trying to make sense of the world. I'm getting a very grounded view. These are people who are 21, 22, 23 years old, sometimes up to 30. I'm getting a very grounded view in the sense that there's a lot of that younger generation who have a very well-honed instinct that things aren't working, and the kind of partial knowledge systems and the partial views that are out there, the war of ideology that's going on, exacerbated by social media and profit interests and what have you, is not the game they want to play, and it's not a game they can afford to play. Like they're smart enough to know that. So when I say it's a generational call, I really do believe that. We're already seeing ways in which the baby boomers are getting older as our forerunners in the movement. Like they're getting older. Now us Xers are doing a lot of leadership in that. The boomers are some of our key funding sources too. So I mean, there's like a natural way. If you know the Japanese life stage model, it kind of is a similar sort of model, but there's a natural thing occurring here, which is really beautiful. But if we're going to do that in a serious way, in a credible way, we also need to say we're doing the work that can give you some confidence as to where and why this is occurring. And I'm talking now to the young people, and this is where you fit, and this is why you should take it seriously. Maybe don't leave your day job. Stay in your career, build your skills, build your self-authoring self inside of the conventional economic system. But as a parallel track, build your integral mind. As a parallel track, build your big picture mind, because increasingly those two things will get integrated, and there will be a lot of contribution to make. And so that's exactly the message. And I think this all comes together pretty nicely.
Yeah, and as you say, it's not just increasing our capacity for big picture sense making, but it's also, so much of our efforts this next year are going to be also kind of doubling down on the meaning making side of the equation, because part of this is about how people make meaning, the stories they tell about themselves, the stories they tell about the human experiment and civilization. And so we want to have as much of an influence on that sort of big picture meaning making as we do the big picture sense making, which is what largely the movement has been focused on, I would say in the last decade, as the sort of epistemic landscape has been fragmented by the internet and social media and all those other factors that we've spent a lot of time analyzing. There's been a real move to focus on the sense making side of what big pictures can do. And that's still incredibly important. And we plan on advancing that work, but we also want to make sure that it's plugged into a larger big picture story about who we are and what it is we're trying to do as a species.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's largely under the rubric of our, new story of wholeness initiative, where we really tell the kind of story that we were talking about a little bit ago, where there does become a transcendental call. And I think I'm glad you emphasized that.
So, what else is amongst our sort of strategic goals for the year that you might want to highlight?
I think we will do a formal campaign on the legacy circle. So letting people know about it, telling them more about it, and continuing to invite those who want to truly make a legacy impact and be part of an ongoing group. We meet every month of contribution and impact to get involved. So we'll do a formal campaign there. We really didn't do much one this year. We did a couple of announcements, but we didn't do any deeper thing. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of dynamic steering to get some of what we're going to try to take on and pull off this coming year is going to be complicated. It's going to require a lot of coordination across a lot of different domains of scholarship and activity and what have you. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot of learning involved, but nothing we do doesn't involve a lot of learning. So that's okay. That doesn't scare us.
And how can folks get involved? How can people expect opportunities to get plugged into what it is that we're trying to help take the larger movement?
Yeah, I mean, as we said, there's like join the volunteer registry that's on the website. Reach out to us. Let us know what's on your mind. If there's ways you can support. If you want to join the legacy circle, reach out to us. Just a lot. If you've got volunteer skills, there's just a lot of different ways that people can. And while we can't take advantage of all those things in the day it comes in, none of it's being lost.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're planning on doing early this year, perhaps even just periodically throughout the year, is to lead sort of a volunteer fair where people who have signed up and say they want to be able to contribute in some way and bring some skill and background to the table can get potentially matched up with initiative leaders within the Institute and have an opportunity to directly contribute to some of those efforts and become a contributor. So we hope to structure some of those volunteer opportunities more intentionally this coming year.
I think that's going to be neat. I mean, we'll see if it works. It'll be a bit of an experiment, but I do think that if people take advantage of it, both from the point of view of the initiative leaders as well as as a potential volunteer pool or people who want to get involved. That's the other thing I'll say in all these conversations I do. Everybody comes in. How can I help? How can I contribute? How can I make an impact? Like, this is a way to do that. So I look at our job as we need to institutionalize or systematize that connection making in a more systematic way so that it happens more regularly, because there's just a huge amount of spiritual energy, for lack of a better term, in the space and in the community. So we're going to work to help do that.
Well, thanks. I think we're coming up on the hour mark here. So I think I'll take this opportunity to wrap us up. But before I do, I just want to say, Robb, it's been an incredible year. I have learned a lot personally, and it's been just a privilege to work alongside you and the other people that are partnering with us in this exciting venture. And I just want to thank you for your leadership in this space. It's been really inspiring, and I can't wait to see where this all goes next in 2025.
Well, right back at you. It's been lovely to work with you. You've been really great at being my thinking partner and execution partner in so many of the things that we do. And it's wild territory, but it's such cool work. And so I've really enjoyed this year with you, and thank you very, very much for that. Very grateful.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, I hope you have a wonderful holiday, and onward and upward in 2025. Thank you, Robb.
Okay, everybody. Thank you. Take care. See you. Bye.